Betar US is a pro-Israel group which has taken credit for several deportation attempts of students who have participated in pro-Palestine protests, one of them being Mohammed Khalil. So who is this group? Apparently they're meeting with the Trump administration. They've got his ear. They're highly influential. Who is Betar US? With us now is Alan McLeod. He is a senior staff writer and podcast producer for Mint Press News, and his latest report, called Betar, the far-right hate group helping Trump deport Israel's critics, can be found at mintpressnews.com. Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Ken.
Tell us about this group. This is concerning. I mean, is this a foreign influence group? I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like.
Well, Betar has a very long history. It's a group that was started in the 1920s as a right-wing Jewish paramilitary. But it's been reborn in 2023 as a group, a pressure group, really in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, to try to push American society in a certain direction and try to organize the American Jewish right into supporting Israel. Its own website describes them as an aggressive, unapologetically Zionist movement, which is dedicated to defending Israel's legitimacy and strengthening the worldwide Jewish connection to the state of Israel. I, in the piece, did call them Jewish fascists, which, might sound quite hyperbolic, but I actually got that from their own website. In fact, their official Our History section, Betar, note that this was developed by the right-wing thinker Jabotinsky in Latvia, in Eastern Europe, and they started with paramilitaries, and that they were directly modeled on Hitler's brown shirts. And they even used the phrase Jewish fascists on their own history page. Not only that, they talk about what they were doing in Palestine in the 1930s and 1940s as, quote, frequently bombing Arab civilian areas, end quote. So we see that this group has got a long history and connection to far-right ideas, to terroristic ambitions. And we're also seeing them do that right now in the United States, targeting intellectuals and critics of Israel. So frankly, the fact that the Trump administration is now so openly working with Betar US in the hopes of trying to discipline the American public into supporting Israel by deporting the leaders of the pro-Palestine movement is a really serious blow to free speech, and it's something everybody should be looking at.
So let me understand this. So the group Betar US, you said that this started off as a paramilitary group back in the 20s?
Yeah, that's right. We have to remember.
Where was that based? Was that like in the United States? Was that in Europe?
It was in Eastern Europe. Specifically, it started in Latvia, but it spread all over Eastern Europe and Central Europe as well. And by the 1930s, they were one of the most powerful and influential Jewish groups around the world. They had around 70,000 members at their peak. And as I said, they were started specifically as a right-wing paramilitary in a time when Europe felt like it was going to war. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. There was a lot of xenophobia across the continent. And so Jewish groups started to organize, and some of them moved in a sort of more Zionist direction. Some of them moved, a lot of them actually, probably the majority at that time, moved towards a much more socialist or communist direction and an internationalist direction. Of course, the Soviet Union had just been born at that time, and the words Jewish and communist were seen as almost synonymous with some people. But Betar was really born out of the feeling of an anti-communist Jewish movement that needed to be built. And they got a lot of funding from big industrialists and big capitalists who wanted to see a reactionary force being built across Central and Eastern Europe.
I didn't know about this group. I mean, this sounds like, I don't know how to say this in a way that's not going to, but if a group is rising up, a paramilitary group rising up in the 20s and the 30s, wouldn't it then be, I guess, the reaction to that by a country to say, we think you're the enemy, that your group is the enemy? I mean, this just seems like this was fuel for the Holocaust, that this was this group rising up, and then suddenly the Nazis are like, well, you've got this group and you're rising up. This doesn't paint the picture that I think of like, oh, the poor helpless Jews, and they were just persecuted, and were completely helpless. And, and I don't want to go down that road. That's not the point of this conversation. But as you're saying this to me, I'm thinking, I mean, if you imagine a paramilitary group rising up to that force here in the United States at this point, it would absolutely be labeled a terrorist group. The government would be going after it with full force. People would be rounded up. They would be deported, or they'd be put into prisons, or, rounded up. I'm not saying that this would be the right thing or whatever it is, but it just seems that a paramilitary group rising up and having that level of force in Eastern Europe seems concerning to me. I mean, that just would be concerning, I think, to any legitimate government.
I think the government's reaction to these things is very much based upon what these groups' ideology is. So, for example, in the United States, there have been many armed groups, many armed militias, right wing, like racist ones, like the people who are the sort of white nationalist groups, the Ku Klux Klan, etc. But they were never really suppressed in the same way in which, for example, black radical revolutionaries like the Black Panthers were, who immediately, as soon as they started to organize and started to bear arms, suddenly the police and the FBI cracked down upon them with like a ton of bricks.
But it makes sense why they would do that. I mean, they would do that because the Black Panthers were not the people in power. I mean, the people that were involved in the Ku Klux Klan back in the day, those were people in positions of power. They had the power, they were maintaining the power, and they were scaring others, right, from trying to rise up into positions of power. Black Panthers, on the other hand, had no power, but they were a rising force, and the fear was they may gain power. So, of course, they were going to suppress any group that could rise up and potentially take the power away from the people who already had it. So I'd imagine it's the same thing for this Jewish group that rises up, and then people around say, oh, like the Jews are rising up, we got to stop them or something. It would be similar to the Black Panthers, like what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said, there were a lot of deeply, inherently viciously anti-Semitic governments coming to power in Europe at that time. And of course, Jewish people were scared. They didn't know what to do. Many of them emigrated en masse to places like the United States or anywhere they could go. Others tried to organize. And as I said, some of them organized in a more sort of left-wing, more communist way, but others also were deeply interested and inspired by the sort of right-wing reactionary politics that was gripping Europe. Unfortunately for them, that right-wing reactionary politics was so deeply and inherently anti-Semitic that they could never really be fully subsumed into that. And so Betar actually became one of the earliest and most powerful proponents of Zionism, which meant the mass emigration of European Jews to the state of Palestine as it was at that time. And they were facilitating as best they could as many people going to Palestine as possible. In fact, Betar was actually named specifically after Brit Yosef Trumpeldor. It's a bit of a sort of acronym. And he was an early Jewish settler who was killed in 1920 in a firefight with Palestinians over disputed land. So the group really has its eye on the prize very early. And early Betar members actually had to swear an oath of loyalty to give their life to the creation of a state of Israel as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could say, well, it was anti-Semitism that was causing, but I mean, if there's a paramilitary group rising up and if they're like wreaking havoc, we saw this throughout the Middle East when Israel became a state. We saw then a lot of Jewish groups going around and trying to terrorize the Jews in other countries to try to get them to feel like they're not safe in Iran or Iraq or wherever it was they were, and to get them to immigrate into Israel. And it sounds to me like this Betar group from the 20s, and we'll get to the Betar group of today, but it sounds to me like they were Zionists with a project, and that project was so in my mind, it seems there's some reason to believe that they would have wreaked havoc in the nations that they were in the governments, in order to scare the Jews that were there, who were living nice lives amongst people in the countries that they were born in, to get them to go to Israel and do this Zionist project that they had in their mind. I mean, in my mind, I guess what I'm saying is, we can label everything as anti-Semitism. I'm really against that, because I think sometimes, like what we're seeing with Israel, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. They're doing something really heinous. So yes, there is anti-Semitism. I see it all the time, just like I see misogyny and racism. But I would think that if there's a paramilitary group, there's legitimate criticism, is I guess my point, for governments at that time to say, wait a minute, but they're rising up against us. It's not just coming from nothing, because we're all born with this inherent level of natural anti-Semitism that just rears its ugly head sometimes, every once in a while, and it's got to be squashed. I mean, there's legitimacy to it, and I would think if a paramilitary group were rising up, there would be some legitimacy to fear and loathing. But that's just. But again, because, and why that's important is it shows the extremism that this group, trying to paint this sort of parallel picture and what's happening today, this extremist group that sounds like its goal was to get Jews to move to Palestine, was going on in the 20s. It was going on in the 30s. Then we know it happened again in the 40s and 50s throughout the Middle East. And look what's happening today. Now we're seeing all this supposed anti-Semitism that we're now finding a lot of Jews themselves are behind the acts. And one has to ask, why would you do that? Because it's beneficial to have a narrative of there's anti-Semitism in order to prop up the project, the Zionist project. And we see this all the time of, well, the Jews need Israel. It makes no logical sense at all when I hear guys like Ben Shapiro saying, I'm safer in America because Israel exists. And it's like, so you're just waiting for the day we're going to expel you. And that's why you think you're safer with Israel. You're waiting for the day for us, your neighbors, your patriots, your fellow citizens, your fellow Americans to turn on you, so that then you're shoved off to Israel. You've got the safe place that you can run off to. It makes absolutely zero sense. But and what we're now seeing with this Betar group today is that they're highly provocative. Some of the things that you've shown in your piece on Mint Press News, the text, the tweets that they put out there, saying give people beepers. I've seen videos of them threatening students with beepers. And they're saying that the student protesting is the terrorist, and this group is saying, let me get you a beeper.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary who they're doing this to as well. For instance, they put out a public statement talking about everybody who supports them should go to London to give Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, everybody should go there and give her a beeper. And we know what that means. That is a reference to the Lebanon pager attack of September, which injured thousands of civilians and was widely condemned as an act of terrorism, not only by governments around the world, but even by prominent people in the US government, like, for example, Leon Panetta, who was the former CIA director. He called it an act of international terrorism. And Betar had been targeting not just Gentiles, but also Jews themselves. So Peter Beinart, who's a liberal, progressive American columnist in New York City, he faced a similar threat. When he had an article published in the New York Times criticizing the state of Israel, Beitar put out a public statement saying that, and I'm quoting now, we urge all Jews on the Upper West Side to give Peter Beinart a pager. He is a traitor, a capo, and we must oppose him. A capo being a Nazi collaborator, one of the Jews that collaborated with the Nazis, which is like the worst insult you can really hurl at someone. So this is the sort of thing they're putting out. They actually slipped a beeper into Norman Finkelstein's pocket. Norman Finkelstein, again, Jewish American scholar who has been strongly critical of Israel and supportive of the Palestinian cause for many decades. So these are the sorts of things they're doing. They're even going out and putting bounties on people's heads. Again, they do this completely publicly. There's one very famous tweet from Betar which says, we will give $1,800 to anyone who hands Nurdin Kisvani, a Palestinian American, a beeper. This is the sort of thing that can just be going on social media at the same time as Ross Glick and other key members of Betar are having conversations with the Trump administration, with people like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, about what to do with the crisis of anti-Semitism in America. And Beitar's solution to that is to deport student activists and anyone who criticizes the state of Israel. So we saw Mahmoud Khalid, one of the leaders of the student protests last year. He was arrested by ICE, shipped halfway across the country. He's probably going to be deported. His heavily pregnant wife didn't even know where he was for the longest time. And this is really not only specifically designed at these people, but it's supposed to be, from the Trump administration's point of view, a silencing tactic. They want this to be seen by everyone and to understand just how brutal and just how authoritarian they can be to suppress freedom of speech, to try to shut down any criticism of Israel and, by extension, the U.S. empire.
I mean, it's just such an incredible psyop the more I think about it. I mean, maybe they're like the attacks on free speech, fundamental American value. A lot of Americans are fighting back against this. They're not tolerating it, even those who've been big supporters of Donald Trump. And if you have the goal, if you are Betar or these ultra-Zionist groups, and your goal is to get Jews to go to Israel so that you can, create this nation, and your goal is also to keep the United States funding the project and supporting the project and protecting the project, one of the tactics might be to attack free speech, to get Americans to hate you, right? I mean, to get Americans to say, you are a scourge on the American society and way of life. Like, you do not value the things we value. We value free speech and you're trying to curb it. We don't want you here. And that right there, that phrase, we don't want you here because of what you're doing, is the goal for them. That's their goal. I mean, everything they're doing, from scaring all the Jews around, I've got a lot of Jewish friends who are not political at all. They're just reading the normal headlines. And one of my best friends, and she'll say things to me like, the anti-Semitism on the campuses is crazy. They're calling for Holocaust of Jews. She's like believing that this is actually happening, and it's not really happening. When you then listen to the protests and what the students are chanting, they're not saying that at all, what's been reported. So there's a mass effort to frighten all of the Jews into believing that they're not safe here. There's a mass effort into, I think, gaslighting the American people into hating Jews, right? And to say, well, you don't appreciate our values. You're trying to curb free speech. We're giving your country that you're claiming is your real country all this money, and you're bombing all these kids. I mean, it's just, it's an amazing psyop, and it's working very well. And this Betar group seems to be very much at the forefront of this. And that's very frightening that they have the Trump administration's attention, and they're being listened to by the Trump administration as they're threatening to give beepers to people and then claiming that those who say stop bombing kids with American bombs are the terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, why this is happening is because Israel serves as like a 51st state. It serves as what many people have called an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East, which is strategically and economically the most important region of the entire world. Geographically, it's right at the center of world trade. All the trade from Asia to Africa to Europe has to pass through the Suez Canal and through the Middle East more generally, through the Red Sea. Of course, it's where all the oil is, which is, the premium commodity around which the entire global economy works as well. And so controlling that area is the highest prize in the United States and war planners in Washington's eyes. As far back as the Roosevelt administration, there are cables calling the Middle East the most stupendous prize in all of world history. And since the 1960s, at least, Israel has functioned as like the local cop on the beat for the United States. And because of that, it gets enormous privileges in Washington. And it's, perhaps along with Saudi Arabia, the key ally in the region, and perhaps even in the entire world. And because of that, criticizing Israel is like criticizing the troops in the United States. It's like really going at the heart of the US empire. And that's why the Trump administration, or any administration before that, frankly, does not really allow open criticism of that country in the newspapers. Now, what I would say is that Betar certainly does not speak for the majority of Jewish people. I saw a recent poll that showed that the plurality of American Jews under 40 actually consider Israel to be a racist apartheid state. And it's the same across the United States as well. There are record low numbers of people sympathizing with Israel and record high numbers of people sympathizing with Palestine. And it's precisely because social media has allowed us to bypass the corporate media, which always, as you were mentioning before, Kim, gives us such a distorted picture of what's going on there and what's going on college campuses as well. And that is also one of the key reasons why there's such a crackdown on social media right now in the United States and across Western Europe as well. It's because governments there do not want us to know the truth. They don't want us sympathizing with the victims of imperial violence, because the minute we start doing that, it means we might actually start getting organized and try to stop those imperial ambitions. And if we do that, then all hell can break loose. And that is absolutely something that they want to stop and nip in the bud. And so that's why we're seeing huge algorithmic crackdowns. We're seeing the arrests, we're seeing deportations. These are all linked, the media and activism together. They're trying to shut down free speech. They're trying to shut down resistance to their projects. And that is really the milieu in which we have to see this problem.
Well, I think they're not only just trying to shut it down. I think they're also fueling it. I think it goes both ways. I don't think they really truly want to shut it down. I guess is my point with going over that history is I think that they're wanting to, which is why they're saying things like, let's give them beepers and go hunt this person down and slip a beeper in their shirt. You know, they're doing things that are highly provocative. And I don't think it's about, oh, poor us, there's anti-Semitism, we need to shut it down, or, oh, we don't want any criticism of Israel. I think they actually want all the criticism. They want the hatred. They want to fuel the anti-Semitism. They want to, it's not even anti-Semitism, but it would just be legitimate criticism even. And then they label it anti-Semitism, right? They want, and they also want to the rise of anti-Semitism. I don't think they're actually in this effort. And I think that's where it gets really fundamental that we have to understand. I don't think this effort of cracking down on speech is truly an effort to crack down on free speech. I think it's actually an effort to turn Americans against Jews while still, you know, to say, see, this is why we need Israel. And this is why it's imperative for the United States to support the country, because we're at risk all the time of anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head. So it just seems like there's multiple layers going on and we're being completely gaslit. And it's not as clear cut. You know, I wish it were so clear cut, but because it isn't, it makes it harder to, I guess, track down and actually curb entirely. I mean, obviously, the biggest way to crack down and curb it would be to get the government to stop being so bought off by the Israel lobby and want to support Israel so badly. I mean, I get your point. I think in the 50s and the 60s, 70s, there was absolutely, even throughout the 80s, there was a need for, you know, from a U.S. foreign policy strategy, there was a need for that aircraft carrier in the Middle East to secure the oil, to make sure that we had access to these other nations' resources in the event that they turn on us or something. So I can understand that from a strategic perspective, but we're beyond that now. We don't need that oil. And we've got Saudi Arabia in our pocket, and they're the biggest, and that's really that's the biggest ally that we really need in the Middle East, and we have them. So, and not only that, we just don't need the oil anymore. I mean, we've got our own, and we've got other sources of energy. And so now it's just the fact that the government's bought off by the lobby. And that's really the only thing keeping us, you know, friendly with this country that's siphoning resources from us and wreaking havoc over here. I mean, but it's just such what a terrible situation for everybody, honestly, for Jews that are here and being terrorized by their own, for Americans who are having their speech rights limited and the country's values eroded, for the Palestinians the most, right? They're being literally killed for this whole project. I mean, this is terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess what I'd say is the United States has actually generally not relied on Middle Eastern oil itself to fuel cars in, in Montana, Maine, or Missouri. It's always actually, been more reliant on North American or oil from Africa or Venezuela, for that matter. But even just controlling the resources there, not just the profits, but controlling it, gives the United States enormous power to dictate how the world economy works. If you can essentially shut down countries from electricity or from energy, that gives you an enormous leverage over those countries. We saw, for example, the hoopla and hysteria in Europe when, Vladimir Putin was threatening to turn off the gas, and that meant that, European businesses might not function, or people would be freezing in their homes in the winter. Well, the United States has a similar sort of power to use and use it as muscle. And unfortunately, for the people of the Middle East and for the people of Palestine, most generally, they have had the misfortune of being born in the most strategically important place in world history right now. And it is really their curse that they have been born and live in such a strategically important area and such an economically rich area, because that means that the world's great powers are being drawn into conflicts here, conflicts over the resources of the world. And that means that the people of Palestine, people of Syria, people of Yemen, people of Iraq, people of Afghanistan, Iran, are the victims of enormous imperial violence. And it's unfortunately those people who are paying the price. Yes, the United States public pays the price in terms of tax dollars going to ridiculous wars that only end up killing people, but the people of the Middle East pay in blood.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so now with this group, Betar US, they're one of many, that are funding and have the influence inside of the administration, the government, not just this administration, as you mentioned, all of them. I mean, this has been going on for decades and decades. So I guess, what should we do? What should we do about this group, do you think?
Well, the first thing we absolutely should do is we should be scrutinizing them. This should be a household name and it should be
Like
shocking to
APAC.
everybody.
So you're saying
Yeah,
like we should turn Betar US like into APAC. We should be
absolutely.
aware.
Absolutely, we should be aware that this group that's going around terrorizing people and openly calling themselves, I mean, pretty much openly calling themselves fascists, certainly on their website, until actually, ironically, about last week when they removed the phrase Jewish fascist from their website, interestingly enough, and they also removed the part about bombing Arab civilians from their website. But yeah, the very first thing we should do is we should shed light on this. And in the longer term, we should be doing what people like Mahmoud Khalil was doing, which is organizing against United States support of Israel's genocide in the Middle East. And that, frankly, has had a serious impact on the United States. If it hadn't had such an impact and it wasn't so worrying for people in Washington, they wouldn't be responding like this. If people like Khalil had been organizing tea parties, which didn't do anything and didn't threaten the power, prestige of the US empire, then frankly, the United States wouldn't be coming down like a ton of bricks on
Yeah.
this movement. So I think that really shows that they're doing something correct. And, that means that we should keep doing it, frankly.
Alan, thank you so much for being on the show and shedding light on this organization. Because you're right, we should make them a household name like APAC. We should understand the forces that are here and what they're trying to do to us. And yeah, so Betar US, that's the group to know. The piece written by Alan McLeod it's called Betar, the far right hate group helping Trump deport Israel's critics. That link is down below. Alan McLeod, thank you so much for joining us. We also have your X link down below so people can follow you there. Is there anywhere else they should go? I've got X and your piece at Min Press News. Otherwise,
Yeah, yeah, I am terminally online, unfortunately. You can also find me on Instagram and also check me out on Telegram as well.
thank you so much, Alan. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can check out Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.